So thank you everyone for being here. If you're new to one of these Women in FinOps, we are doing a monthly series where we really try to feature a woman in our community, and it's really time for them to tell their story, their journey, and really for us to learn from them. And then just a great open place to have kind of questions if you're working on, going through a career change yourself. So thank you all for joining us here. Just real quick code of conduct, just to remember that, want to be contributing, be respectful, everyone with inclusion, no sales pitches, making sure, this is a close net circle. We do record these. If there's anything you want edited out, you can just let me know, and we will do that as well. Real quick for the agenda today. So we've got a woman FinOps that we're going to feature. We're going to talk a little bit about how you can get more involved in the FinOps Foundation. And then because X is coming up, I figured I'd save a few minutes for any Q&A that you all might have on that. So to start, I want to welcome Janine. I remember when we first started doing this series, I was asking for some speakers, and she was like, I might do it, reach out to me later. And then she's like, okay, I'm going to jump on board and do it. So I'm really, really appreciative of that. It just has a phenomenal career journey that you all are going to hear about today. Has been in a lot of different roles and positions, and just kind of one of those people that puts her heads down and learns and attacks the work in front of her. So I'm really excited for you guys to all hear that. She's recently shifted to a consulting role in the FinOps space, which I also think is very interesting because it's just a really unique ecosystem where we have people moving from enterprises to vendors to cloud providers and consulting. And so if being a consultant is something that you're interested in, I think she'd be a really good mentor for you as she's kind of in her initial stages of this journey. So yeah, Jean, I think I'll turn it over to you, and then we'll come back to these slides at the end.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ashley, and thanks for the intro. Okay. Right, let me start sharing my screen. Okay. Right, so I hope everyone can hear me. So my name's Janine Pickard-Green, and I just wanted to talk about embracing change and sort of leaping forward, which I'll explain a bit more detail as we go along. And really, it's like my journey to FinOps consulting. It's my journey in terms of career and coming from South Africa to the UK and then back again. And so I just wanted to share some of that with you. Hopefully it's insightful, and hopefully it's something that will really sort of resonate with a lot of people. I know with the other FinOps and Women series, I've felt like every time I'm nodding my head during the calls and really agreeing with everything that everyone's been saying and putting on the chat, oh yes, I know exactly what you're meaning, etc. So it's definitely something that, I've really enjoyed so far. So a few things about me. I am the FinOps lead for MagicOrange. I'm a chartered management accountant by background. I got my FinOps certified cloud practitioner last year, and I am working on the budget for the cloud professional at the moment. So I'm hoping to do that this year. I'm the mom of 3 children, 5 cats, 2 dogs, one very patient husband. And as Stacey knows, because I tend to send her photos all the time, is that I also have an occasional troop of monkeys that like to run across my roof while I'm on calls. And we do have snakes and lizards in the garden. So that's what I'm looking after most days. And then in my spare time, which is obviously very, very little, I sing as well as paint. So I'm located in Durban, South Africa on the East Coast, which is fairly subtropical. So I don't think we get below 4 degrees Celsius. And I've lived in South Africa majority of my life, except for 18 years in the UK, which I'll mention. Okay. So when we talk about South Africa, we always have to sort of talk about the sort of apartheid and what that meant. And so from my perspective, I grew up towards the end of apartheid. So for the first 13 years, I lived fairly oblivious to the fact that South Africa was different to other countries, and that going to school only with people who happened to be of the same skin tone as me was actually unusual, and in actual fact was incorrect. So in 1990, Nelson Mandela was released, and within a year of him actually being released, all the schools were instructed to integrate their schooling environments. But it was actually optional. So we didn't get we actually had an option as to whether we wanted to integrate, which is kind of appalling when you think about it. So, and the other thing that happened is that we actually, as students, and I was had just started high school. It was my first year of high school. The teachers actually took us as a class and actually said to us that we needed to kind of work on our parents to try and get them to say no to integration. And that they also said, and the way they did that was almost like fear mongering, to say, if you integrate, you are going to have your education deteriorate and your education is going to suffer as a result of it. So there was a huge amount of negativity around the change and how it would impact our school in particular. And I'm really incredibly grateful that the entire parent-student body actually voted for integration, because a lot of schools actually chose not to, but a huge amount of schools did choose to integrate. And what it meant for me was that change, it was a massive change for the school, but it was a change that was incredibly important to me as an individual, because I got to meet two of my closest friends that I've ever got to meet. And those two friends of mine immediately said, this is what apartheid is like for us. This is what our families have actually suffered as a result of going through apartheid. And they really kind of opened my eyes up to a completely new viewpoint that honestly for 13 years I hadn't been aware of. So I went from a school which was really just a bunch of kids that were with my skin tone to a multicultural school, which was an incredible experience to actually have as I had experienced my last 4 years of high school. And so one of the things I really think is important is that change can often be met with skepticism and fear. And there's those who believe that change will result in negative outcomes. And in reality, change can be a life-affirming experience that exposes us to a whole new viewpoint and outlook on life. So it's really imperative that we remain open to the possibilities that come with change, even if it feels daunting at first. And by embracing change, we open ourselves up to new perspectives and opportunities that we may never have encountered otherwise. I know Ali Whitman from Disney also mentioned embracing change as a key skill set for FinOps. And I think it's something that I agree is a fundamental skill, because as FinOps practitioners, we are often seeing massive changes in organizations we're working on in terms of how they're using new technologies and how they're progressing on that FinOps lifecycle journey. And it's up to us to both embrace change in our own processes and procedures and also help facilitate change within those journeys. So I feel like in a lot of cloud adoption journeys, we're going to be met with that kind of resistance or people being slightly fearful of actually adopting those things. And having the skill set to embrace change, whether it's a big change or whatever kind of change that is to those organizations, is something that's incredibly important. So moving on, after school, there was a lot of unrest. And so what I did was I took a gap year learning business computing and desktop publishing. And my parents often couldn't afford, well, they couldn't afford university and jobs were scarce. So I ended up working at a one-star hotel and I was incredibly shy, still introverted, which I am today, and really, really naive, which I'm not going to go into details with. And the first few weeks, I did not move from behind this desk. So I literally, and this is the desk that I was at, I literally stood behind that reservation desk and I followed scripted greetings to customers. And I never actually did anything else other than that. So that's how I started out. And about 3 weeks into my job, my boss turned around to me and said, "You need to put yourself forward." Okay. So what it means to put myself forward was that she meant that I needed to start talking to customers and learning that different viewpoints are, if I stayed behind that reservation counter, I wasn't going to meet people properly. And when I started putting myself forward, I met veteran Olympians, senior police officers, traveling businessmen, and I met criminals and people from far off backgrounds who were unexpectedly kind and considerate. And as an introvert, it can be tough sometimes to speak up and to start engaging with people and asking them questions. But being able to ask people loads of questions is really key to understanding our organization's needs for cloud. So putting myself forward even encompasses this webinar. So if you had told me I would be presenting a webinar even 2 years ago, I would have thought you might have lost your marbles. It's just not something I typically do. Could everyone hear me okay still? We're good.
Yeah, you sound good. I think when we were, having a prep talk, we both talked about, we had this in common. We both worked at hotels, and you're right. Like, just being able to talk to strangers all day, it just helps you kind of break out a little bit. So I love that story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was like a baptism by fire to be someone who was introverted, to be in that environment. It was certainly an eye-opening experience during that time. Thanks, Ashley. So in FinOps, you need skills to be able to talk to engineers, finance, senior executives. All these people have different viewpoints and outlooks. Some of these engagements will definitely be challenging, and it's important to keep the communication going and to be transparent and open-minded in order to be successful FinOps practitioners. So you've got to keep on engaging and putting yourself forward. And that's one of the lessons that I learned from that experience. So one of the most life-changing decisions I've made was to move to the United Kingdom. I'd always wanted to travel. My parents were like the original hippies, so they basically raised us telling us stories about backpacking around Europe and breaking down all the time with their car. And so it was something that we always, as children, were aspiring to go to Europe and see all the sights and travel. And because I was sitting, like the career with the hotel was going well, and, everything else in my life was really settled, I kept on putting back that travel experience. So I knew I wanted to go up to the UK and I knew I wanted to travel, but I kept on putting it on hold and procrastinating and saying, oh, well, everything else in my life is going fine. It's, I'll get to it eventually. And so one of the things that kind of completely changed that picture for me is that in 1997, my cousin went to a nightclub, and when he came out of the nightclub, he got caught in a police shootout, and he died on Christmas Eve of 1997. So he was 27 years old, and at that point, my cousin had got everything in his life in order. So he was in a long-term relationship. He just started a successful business. He had all his ducks in a row, and he was really looking forward to the next stage of his life journey. And it was an incredible moment to me to actually realize, okay, based on that experience, here I am, almost stuck in a rut and not taking that big leap forward because I keep on thinking maybe later, or I keep on procrastinating it and putting it off. And so 8 months after we lost my cousin, I got on a plane, and it was the first flight I'd ever taken. And I flew from Durban at the time all the way through to London. And that's kind of how my UK journey began. So when I got to the UK, I did all my traveling for 3 months, and then I basically fell in love with the UK. And unbeknownst to me, I would end up staying in the UK for nearly 18 years and acquiring a husband and children and an accounting qualification. So that's kind of like how I ended up in the UK, was not procrastinating. And because life is short, sometimes you have to make those big decisions, and sometimes you have to push yourself out of those moments. At the end of the day, life is really short. And I think that first tragedy in my family life was definitely something that made me realize that it's time to actually kind of do things like that, to push myself out for that. I don't know if anyone's had similar experiences, but that was definitely a pivotal moment in my life. Cool. So less emotional. So in the early 2000s, I had the opportunity to join a startup. So ironically, it was just after the dot-com crash, so probably not the time that most people were joining a startup. But I was really lucky that it was run by a phenomenal 26-year-old female managing director, and she had a background in consulting. And it was my first foray into the technology industry. And as typical as most startups, you get told that this is the role that you're going to be doing. But in actual fact, you end up with a job role that's very multifaceted. So for me, I ended up doing office management and finance and development and even a bit of legal and testing and project management. So it was an incredibly varied role in order to get this product off the ground. So 6 months after joining, we launched a product. It was, and this is why I've got a very old phone on here, a mobile marketing or mobile auctioning platform product. And the product actually worked off a WAP push or SMS messaging system. So for those of you who remember, WAP push was an old standard that allowed early mobile phones to access the internet through a WAP gateway. So it wasn't like we could just click on and get the internet connectivity that we do on our smartphones. And the WAP gateway then identified the device that you were using and then formatted the website or image in a format that you could actually look at. So our auction site was actually hosted on a website, which you could access it through WAP push to have a look at the different products. And because it's formatted content, it can be slightly slow and quite cumbersome, but it was a new technology at the time. And so a lot of organizations were actually developing for WAP push, and they were developing using SMSs, etc. I decided to go on a trip to South Africa just about 3 or 4 months after the launch. And when I came back, instead of there being over 100 employees, there was 30 employees. And I remember walking into the office and half of the desks were empty, and then being told that the company had actually shifted its strategy. So it's quite interesting, but one of the things that was the reason for mobile auctioning at that time not being successful was that we kind of jumped the gun. So now we obviously know that the success of mobile auctioning and betting today is phenomenal. But at that time, even though we'd done market research to have a look at the technology and tested it before the launch, not as many people were actually using mobile phones. People were a little bit anxious about doing sort of purchasing things on auctions via phone systems and using those payment features. And so what we discovered was that the market just wasn't ready for it. And the fact is that WAP push at that time was fairly cumbersome to use. And we were at the point where we were before smartphone connection. So it kind of got phased out in the mid 2000s. And so we would have had to develop a new product anyhow. Thanks to our very strong management team, we actually pivoted. So we pivoted to mobile marketing, which required fewer developers and more marketeers. And within 2 months of actually pivoting, we were advertising SMS competitions on Kit Kat bars for Disney and doing mobile marketing for McDonald's. So users were much quicker at embracing texting codes for competitions and compared to using a mobile auctioning site. And so one of the things that I immediately learned from that experience is that we're always faced with new technologies, but the timing of when those technologies is right for the market might be completely different. There's lots of companies that you kind of find out about these really exciting new products, and you want to use them because you're curious to use them and embrace them as soon as possible. But sometimes the timing might not be right to have that particular solution in play. So organizations need to take those risks and explore new technologies, and we need to be adaptable but we need to be able to pivot away. And so in FinOps, we know that there's a lot of integrated AI cloud technologies, and the pace that we're actually seeing of new cloud services being launched by all the different cloud providers means that we're actually in the front line of seeing those technologies and how our customers can actually start to use those technologies. It's very easy to kind of want to get on the bandwagon and to start using them, but we have to outweigh all the rewards of using that new technology against any of the risks. So I don't know if anyone's had similar experiences with new technology where people have jumped in ahead of the curve, or it would be great to get everyone else's feedback around examples that you might have of a similar situation where people have done similar.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely personally following a lot of like the AI and the chat GPT trends right now. And obviously I'm super curious of like how it's going to tie into like FinOps as well. But I'm really interested in seeing how many organizations are going to jump on the bandwagon. I think we also saw this not too long ago with the metaverse was kind of hot and it's kind of died back down again. And so I'm always looking how those are going to impact like the efficiency of resources being built too.
I think I
Lori,
have yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
I have experience of rather not in general new technology, but the technology that is too advanced for a specific company. That it's coming in, they're trying because others are doing it, and then it's kind of like, well, we're not actually there, so you have to go back in a way.
Yeah.
Several times.
I know, exactly. Yeah, exactly. No, as the irony was like also worked for Scion TechLogic, who used to do like the Palm pilots, and they were the competitors to the Palm pilots. So they're almost like before smartphones. And I often think if their technology had come at about the same time as smartphones, they probably would have been on a par. But they actually introduced their sort of like their range of smart application or smart hardware about 20 years before the technology was in place, or the architecture and the coding was in place to actually cater for it. And so it's you kind of like you want to have everyone like engaging with new technology and having those experiences, but you don't always get that. There's so many companies that are like that where you hear these stories, and it's just something that is really interesting to take on board. Yeah. So fast forward a little bit, after my startup experience, I pursued accounting, and so my passion for the technology industry definitely remained strong. So as I said, I worked in an IT hardware manufacturing company called TechLogic, and I learned about service contracts and the development lifecycle and hardware. And then I worked for Global Knowledge, and I learned information about Cisco and Microsoft training labs and ERP architecture requirements. I project managed the implementation of an ERP system across 14 European and Middle Eastern companies, and gathering requirements from different stakeholders and liaising with a software partner. And I needed to understand everything about the ERP solution. So when I was first given the project, I thought, well, I just need to know how the accounting package works and that will be fine. What I ended up doing was working a lot with our IT team in terms of making sure that we had the right architecture in play, looking at how we could integrate with our other systems, and also making sure that the reporting outputs could actually integrate with our existing reporting suite, which was Click at the time. So I learned a lot more about the fact that it wasn't just one solution, and I needed to think about all the different elements that were factored into it. And it's ironic now because I think in a way through those experiences, whilst I was doing a finance role, I often was actually working with IT teams. I was working in the IT industry. I was getting exposed to those IT areas. And now that I actually look back at it, I think that IT finance was definitely an unknown career option for me, but it just kept on knocking on the door. So I think that was definitely part of how I actually ended up in FinOps at the end. So when I first moved to the UK, the one thing, just to explain some of the differences that I actually experienced. When I moved to the UK, and I know this is like quite a while ago, but the Spice Girls were singing about girl power. And there was a lot of conversations at that time. Ann Summers had just been launched, so we knew we had female representation at executive level and board level. We were seeing a lot more senior management roles within the UK, and it was really gaining traction. But when I was growing up in South Africa, and this was just my own experience within the people that I knew, the majority of the moms that I knew actually stayed at home. And so there was this concept that the moms stayed at home, and the dads were the breadwinners, and the men stayed in they were the ones who went out and worked and earned all the money. So it was very traditional. And so one of the first changes I realized when I moved to the UK was that I was noticing there were a lot more working moms in the workplace compared to what I'd seen in South Africa. And I also started to realize there were a lot of changes in terms of how many senior managers there were who were actually women. And so in terms of actually moving into that environment, I wouldn't say that we were at that point that rights equality in the UK was where it is now, because I still had an experience where I was objectified. So I worked in a little company in near London, Piccadilly, and I'm not going to name them. But I had a senior male manager who sent me to go and buy him a Kit Kat every single day and fill up his parking meter so that his car didn't get a ticket. And his idea of a reward for the fact that I'd actually gone and done this task that was part of my job for some reason was to actually go and pinch my bottom and tell me well done. And so I was absolutely horrified. And I remember going to one of the senior female colleagues and just saying, you know, this is what I've actually experienced. And her reply to me at the time was that he's old fashioned, it's harmless, it's just a bit of fun. And I think that experience, compared to where things moved in terms of the UK after quite a number of years while I was living there, just showed how much we actually progressed in terms of equality, because at that time it was almost deemed as okay for you to be rewarded in that manner by an older senior employee. So for a lot of ladies, we have progressed, and just to be aware of that. So in my personal life, I'm incredibly blessed to have a partner who supported me during my studies to become a qualified accountant. He's also embraced co-parenting. So when our children arrived, he decided to take 2 days working from home with the kids, which was amazing. And then I managed to negotiate a 4-day working week after my first child was born. And I would often say yes to business trips. And I never thought about actually asking him if it was okay. And it never was an issue. So looking back, you know, I would say something like, I'm going off to Denmark for 2 weeks. And at the time, my youngest son was 8 months old, and my husband just didn't even raise an eyeball or make any mutterings about it. So it was absolutely fine for me to go and do business trips. And I never had to check with them or do anything like that. Okay. Ashley, over to you. I think this first of the questions.
Yeah, such an amazing support system. I absolutely love that. I did want to ask you, so when you decided to move back, what were some of the bias or stereotypes when you moved back that were different, or maybe some things that hadn't changed that you thought maybe would be a little bit more progressive?
Thanks, Ashley. Okay, so I think the one thing that I really struggled with is that I think when I moved back to South Africa, so I moved back in 2015, and one of the things I thought we would just fit back, and I just assumed that it would be the same. And the first thing that I realized was that equality for women hadn't moved at the same pace as I expected in South Africa. And patriarchy was very much still a cultural norm. So the majority of executives and board members and senior managers that are in the workplace at the moment are still male. And then the other thing that I sort of like, I actually pulled a stat just to look at that. And if we look at something like the UK, obviously we're still progressing in the UK, but 39% of FTSE 100 companies are led by women at the moment. Whereas in South Africa, that representation is actually at 15%. So we're talking about less than half of women who are on the top 100 companies in South Africa. Well, we're talking about half of the percentage of the UK where we're getting that represented. So out of the 100, there's 15 women in executive positions. And then of those, only 7 of those companies actually CEO positions, where they're actually companies which are run solely by women. And the women who are in those roles are earning up to 31% less than men in the same roles in South Africa. So that's a huge shift to what I was actually seeing in the UK. And it's definitely something in South Africa that I think hopefully will progress at the rate that the UK did. But I think at this moment in time, you're still having to we're probably about 10 to 15 years behind the UK in terms of equality, in terms of getting equal pay. And I think one of the things that kind of made me really realize that, and sort of like come to realize that it's, sorry about the come to realize that this was a particular issue, is that I had a business trip, and when I was asked to actually go on the business trips, I was asked whether or not I needed to check with my husband first. And also if I was going to be able to go on the business trip as a mom. And I think that was something that I'd never actually had experienced before. And I was really thrown because I wasn't expecting anyone to kind of want me to actually go check with my husband, but B, also to think that because I was a mom, I might not be able to actually go and travel, and there might be restrictions to that. And I don't think that that was something that they knowingly prejudiced me against. I think that was just something that's a society norm, that you still have that situation where you have to check with your husband, and that's normal. And that's not something that we kind of had experienced in the UK. So that was a big shift. The other thing that I found was quite interesting was that when we looked at sort of like networking for roles and things like that, was that people you kind of found that you actually needed to go to the right university or go to the right schooling. And a lot of the way that people networking is based on the private schools that people actually went to. So if you went to those private schools, or if you had a connection to those private schools, you would actually find out about a job role in a senior position. If you didn't have that exposure or didn't have those connections, it can be really challenging. So I think that if I hadn't had the international experience that I'd been exposed to, and if people had just been looking solely at my education and what I'd actually covered from an education perspective, I know that it would have been really hard for me to actually get a similar position to what I have now in South Africa compared to the UK.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit on our chat too. With you not having like the formal education, did you ever feel like that held you back, or like how did you work around that at times?
So I think that with the formal education, it's quite an interesting one. It's something that I've actually I've thought about quite a lot. When I look at it from the perspective of how I've from an experience perspective, I think that what I did was gain a lot of experience in a whole different areas. And I think one of the things with a formal education is occasionally you'll go and go to university and you study one particular subject, but you might not be able to apply it. Or you'll have some of the skills that you learn from it, but you can't apply 100% of it. So one of the advantages I always find with not having a formal education is what I've tended to do is I've gained a lot of experience in a particular area. And then when I found it really interesting, then I've actually gone and done a short course. I've actually studied, or I've learned a lot about it. So I feel like that has actually helped me in terms of and not hold me back as a result of that. I do think there are times I think that people are kind of thrown that I haven't had a university education. And I do find that sometimes people say, well, you seem to have missed off your CV, your university education. And then I have to say, well, actually, I didn't get it. My parents couldn't afford it. And kind of actually sort of like talk to the experience that I've had and what I've actually managed to study as a result. I think as well, like I'm concerned that, with like algorithms and technology, if they start to actually look at keywords, like if you've got a university, then maybe that will be the point where not having a formal education will start to actually play a part in how I get held back. But hopefully that won't be the case for a while. Hope that answers the question, Ashley.
Well, that's really good. And one thing I like too is like you definitely are like a life learner. And I think sometimes when you like find something that you're interested in, you're more passionate about like taking an extra course or watching, YouTube videos, because it's like you genuinely have interest in it versus kind of like being forced to take a course too. So I think that's really interesting. How did you move from accounting to FinOps? What was that big like transition look like?
Let me get to, sorry, one sec. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so it's a great question. So my journey to FinOps began in South Africa. So I started working in IT finance as a consultant for a financial service company. And so the focus was really on demand management and scenario planning. And I often used to hear people debating whether to use MIPS or CPU seconds to allocate mainframe costs to applications. So I spent a lot of time Googling all the terminology because that wasn't something that I'd come across frequently. And as a consultant, I'd speak to product managers and application owners, and I absolutely loved the varied conversations and the different views and business cases they represented. I learned about technology, business management, and cost transparency from colleagues who'd really been in the place for about 12 years. And it was a really steep learning curve for a pure accountant, but I really found it rewarding because I loved the technology and the finance, and now I was actually able to marry the two things that I really enjoyed in one role. I then I moved over to MagicOrange as a business analyst and eventually a product management role. So that meant that I changed focus to look at things from the development perspective and looking at project management. And I'm still liaising with different customers to talk to them about their different requirements and create business cases and communicating those to the development team. So one client happened to say to me, "We want your assistance in managing cloud financial management." And this was about 3 years ago. And that's kind of where I started my FinOps journey, was starting to unpack that client's particular pain points around cloud allocations and looking at solutions that could help compare their on-premise versus cloud products. It's kind of opened me up to a whole new learning path. And it really helped me realize that cloud FinOps was a particular pattern, a particular area that I wanted to focus on. So as a result, whenever someone from the customer success team was asking a question about cloud, or they'd rope me in to do things to help on demos or to do consulting in relation to cloud. And I started to do a bit of a dual role. So I ended up doing product management and a little bit of cloud consulting, but more the consulting was more like 10% of my role. And so at that last year, I went through quite a lot of, which I'm going to go basically through now. So last year I had a really challenging year. What I know I've mentioned it on previous calls with everyone, but I started menopause, which had an incredible impact on me emotionally. I also had a very close relative diagnosed with cancer, which thankfully he's now free of. I had 3 angelversaries where I was celebrating milestones since family members had actually passed on. And I was doing this dual role, which was incredibly pressurized. It was exciting. I worked with a phenomenal team, very supportive. But that combination of like a lot of sort of events that were happening personally and menopause actually ended up with me starting to start to actually have I started to cry at work, which I never do. I'm a very strong person. And I really started to struggle with actually sort of resetting and actually starting that journey again to push forward for my career. And so I was incredibly grateful at the time because there's a really great podcast series from Davina McCall that talks about menopause and how it actually impacts women and how you might find yourself crying at your desk, which I'd really never done. And you might find yourself struggling to actually reset and start again. And I think that at that point with so much change in my life and going through all of those emotions, I actually decided that I really wanted to focus on the area that I was starting to be incredibly passionate about. And that's kind of when I then took that giant leap and said, I'm really into FinOps and I want to focus 100% on FinOps consulting. And both understanding exactly why I'd been feeling the way I'd been feeling because of I was going through menopause and everything else that was happening, and actually realizing it was a great opportunity to take another leap into the unknown. That's kind of how I ended up in FinOps. Thanks, Ashley.
I love that. And yeah, I know just Lori says, but thank you for being so like transparent, open about that, and sharing that story with us as well. It sounds like you had a pressure cooker situation, and only one thing happened in that situation. So really appreciate you sharing that. I am really fascinated about you being in consulting, and you said that we were talking earlier, you're like, I was like, there are a lot of women in consulting, like what's that look like? And I was kind of surprised that you said, yeah, there actually are. Could you tell us a little bit about like what you've kind of noticed in the consulting space now?
Yeah, absolutely. Within our consulting team, we've actually really lucky that, well, I'm not going to up all men consultants, but we actually have 80% of our consultants who are actually female. And the majority actually, they come from a financial background like myself. And what is nice across our entire consulting team is we really kind of share knowledge about technology, business management and FinOps, so we can engage with our customers. And also, because I'm the only FinOps consultants, I tend to give advice one way, but the team is incredibly supportive. And I think that being a woman in consulting, having that support from your colleagues and having the peers to actually engage with is incredibly important. I've also found that starting with FinOps Consulting, that the FinOps Slack channel and that entire community, being able to actually go and talk to people who have been doing FinOps Consulting a lot longer than myself and our expertise in their field has really helped me in terms of actually moving more into that FinOps Consulting space. I think there was a lot of things when I moved into consulting that that I needed to actually factor in. So for instance, one of the things that I'd always done is I'd contracted for clients, and that's quite different from actually consulting for a client. So when you're contracting for a client, the job role is very much defined and the sale is complete. But obviously with consulting, you also need to almost have selling skills to be able to pitch advisory services. So being able to actually sell and pitch those advisory services was something that I'd never really done as a contractor. It's something that I've never really had experience, and it's a skill set I'm learning or trying to learn to do at the moment. The other thing is that I found that the product management skills and the business analysis skills that I'd actually accumulated in my previous experience actually helped me phenomenally in terms of looking at what our client requirements are and actually starting to build out business cases and understanding what's required. And that's been very valuable to that role moving into the consulting space. And I've definitely found that that time management obviously becomes more important because you have to be billable and deliver based on those requirements. So it's very much making sure that you deliver value to your consumers. And the final thing is, as a FinOps consultant, it's not just consulting. You actually have to carve out quite a lot of time to do research and keeping your skills relevant and reading up on different parts of FinOps to really understand that whole journey. So there's a lot of things that I'm still unpacking in terms of being a consultant in FinOps, but I'm definitely finding that the community as a whole and actually that whole journey has been tremendously helped because there's so many fantastic mentors who've done that before.
Oh, so I just want to do a call to anybody is thinking about getting into consulting role. Reach out. You can get a lot of advice and kind of, hear about a little bit more about the role. I know I've had a couple people ping me asking me about some consulting jobs that are posted on jobs.finops.org. And I think you found your mentor if you're looking for one in this space. So I do want to a few minutes and turn to the whole rest of the group. Thank you so much for doing this. Like this phenomenal story, your background, what you've been through, and like you're very dynamic at handling change, and really appreciate you sharing that with us.
Thank you very much, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to do it. Definitely was a leap into the unknown. Thanks.
So I want to open up to the whole group, see if you have any questions for Janine as we have her online.
I like the FinOps animal.
So I guess I have a question for Janine. In all the experiences you've been through, if you had something stand out as the most unexpected or the most surprising in a positive way, what might that have been for you?
That's a great question. Thank you. I definitely want to say it's the fact that you just get so much support. So I remember probably about a month or two ago, I was chatting on one of the channels and saying, well, I don't know what a career in FinOps actually looks like. And I wasn't expecting anything from it. And then Kim messaged me to say, how can I help? Let's set up a call. Let's talk about where you're at, what you want, how you want to progress. And I think that was something that was so incredibly positive. It wasn't expected. I just didn't expect to have that engagement and to have someone want to mentor me and to actually help me with that journey. And we had an amazing conversation where she gave me some great tips, which I'm really, really grateful for. And I think that was an incredible experience and one I wasn't expecting.
That's the best feeling too, when you reach out and then someone like jumps out and it was like, yeah, let's get on a call, and making the time for you. I love that.
Especially when it's somebody that like can truly relate with it and just your situation, and not do it for grandstanding reasons, but really just to help promote, amplify, and elevate somebody else. That's just amazing. I'm so happy.
So maybe we'll take one more question and then I'll talk a little bit about other ways to get involved, and then I'll just spend a few minutes on X to see if you guys have any questions on that.
I can ask a question about how does it feel being introvert now when being trained with real life experience enough? Do you still feel the introversion hitting in?
Yeah, no, I kind of feel like I'm a closet introvert, and there's still moments where I think to myself, goodness, what am I doing? And it's incredibly scary, especially, talking at big events and demonstrating products. And, I think after a call, I'll still go, oh my gosh, did I really say that? And things like that. So I know I'm very good at actually starting to talk and starting to engage with people, because it's something that I've been doing for 20 something years, and you kind of get used to it. But I still, if anyone says, would you say you're an extrovert? I'd definitely say I'm not. I definitely feel like I'm still in that bucket of being an introvert. Great question, Sandra. Thanks.
Awesome. So I want to talk about a few ways to kind of get involved, because there has been kind of some updates to things that the foundation's working on. So if we have a working group, so Janine, I know you're part of them. We've got a couple people that are part of them. Sam is also on the call. She's our program manager over our working group program. And so I just wanted to show, because I get this question a lot, like, how do I join a working group? And so if y'all are on the FinOps website and you go, you can't see that I have something stuck. If you go over to projects and click on project overview, we do list out all the different working groups. And so these ones are active, meaning they're already working on the deliverables. And then we have a few right now that are looking for support. So this is a really great way to get engaged. You also start kind of, I don't know if everyone else feels this way, but you kind of start meeting people on a more intimate basis, because you're meeting with them once a week for an hour a week. And it's just a great way to build a networking community. And the other thing I wanted to do a call out, some other changes, is we have moved a lot of our events to this events page. So you can see like the Women in FinOps SIG is listed here. We've also got some government SIGs. We've got an ITAM SIG. And then what I wanted to specifically tell you all is there's now a new thing that you can submit a speaker proposal, so that if anytime you're like, I got a really good idea, I've got this topic I want to talk about. It can be like a career topic. It can be a capability topic. It could be an intersecting. You can fill this out, and we're now using this to collect, having people go speak at our roadshow. So there's a roadshow tomorrow in New York, and also plugging them into the different meetups that we have going too. So if you're looking for an opportunity, this is the place to submit a proposal. You can also message me, but we're regularly looking at these and trying to plug people in as well.